Welcome to the MSDW podcast. I'm Jason Gumpert, editor at msdynamicsworld.com. On this episode, we are looking at how companies are adjusting to the disruption caused by COVID-19, with a particular eye toward its impact on the delivery of ERP projects. We're talking with David Misakian, Delivery Management Group Lead at Avanade. Avanade's also the sponsor of this episode. David's work focuses on ERP solutions, including Dynamics 365 for finance and operations, and he's been on the front lines this year as companies have been adapting to the changing conditions worldwide. Hi, David. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself as we get started here?
Sure, yeah. My name is David Misakian, and I work in delivery management at Avanade. I'm based in Seattle, and I've led global teams of 20 to 200 consultants on various projects, including ERP, CRM, business transformation, infrastructure, security, and custom application development.
So I thought we would start off by talking about some of the concerns that you're hearing about, some of the pressures that these firms are facing, given the current pressures, the current work conditions, maybe restrictions you'd call them. What are you seeing out in the field today?
Well, we're seeing primarily employers concerned about the health and safety and welfare of their own employees. I mean, that's, I think, first and foremost, and it's good to hear that from a lot of managers and executives that I talk to. And then, of course, there's the economic climate. There's so much uncertainty out there right now about what's coming up, what they can expect, and when people can actually get back into the offices. So until that actually happens, there's also lots of questions on how to work remotely. Fortunately for us at Avanade, we have it's really in our blood, and we breathe remote work because many of us are traveling consultants. But they're coming in trying to understand from us what we can do to help them move into this new work life.
From an operational perspective, when you're talking to clients, are you hearing that they're, shifting the way that their own teams are taking up responsibilities? Are roles changing in any way?
I haven't necessarily seen roles change. Per se that, Bob may be doing one job today versus another, or yesterday and today he's got a new role within the company. There's sometimes a little bit of reorganization taking place, but mostly it's a question of how can we get our employees working in a manner that can be done over the internet and can be done with a certain level of flexibility, because now the kids are at home and they now have to provide not only child care, but also, now do homeschooling, especially for a lot of folks here in the United States. I'm sure that's also happening worldwide. In terms of what we're seeing, and I understand it at Avanade, our pipeline is still pretty strong because we have that global presence, and we're able to react and still engage in the sales process and also in the delivery process being done remotely.
Yeah, maybe we could talk a little bit more about how Avanade mobilizes projects in today's environment. Can you talk a little more about that?
Sure. To level set, my understanding of the term mobilization is the transition from the sales pursuit team to the solution delivery team. And that's kind of sometimes a risky venture. There could be lots of miscommunication.
Under the best of circumstances.
Yeah, exactly. So for us, and compared to other consulting companies that I've had the chance to work for, Avanade's got a heritage with both Accenture and Microsoft. We approach things from a very industrialized and programmatic view. So we've got frameworks and templates and tools to be able to rapidly mobilize and to get to work just that much faster. That means faster results for a client. It also means, quite frankly, more employee satisfaction on our behalf, right? Because our people are getting feedback and they feel like they're making progress faster. But, ultimately, this is a relationship-based business. I mean, yes, we're all technologists and so forth, but we are people, right? And it's understanding the pains and the desires and the optimism, or, what they want to see out of the solution is what's going to make it a big success. So we have, like I said, we have tools that we can use, processes, a whole toolbox of stuff, and we can talk a little bit about that more if you want.
Yeah, I would love to dive into that maybe from an ERP project perspective in particular. Can you talk about some of maybe those tools or some of the measures that you're taking to ensure delivery with your clients?
Yeah, and this is not just necessarily in terms of the world of remote work, but regardless if it is a project that's starting today or a project that started a year ago or a project that's going to start a year from now, like I said, we have a bunch of tools and templates that we can use. A lot of those are under an umbrella. I think it's called AIES internally, which I think is Avanade Intelligent Enterprise Services. This is a series of business process models that are industry specific. Some of them are cross industry if we have to go there, but they include stuff like end-to-end workflows and templates to accelerate data migrations and training documentation so that map into that business process workflow. So, for example, if you're trying to do an order to cash for the energy industry versus a manufacturing industry, we have targeted specific templates there. And our team is able to go in and mobilize quickly and get in front of the customer and say, hey, here's what we think, or some of our best research says that what you're trying to do in your industry, let's sit down and go through step by step and make sure this actually aligns. And if there's a variance, let's discuss why and how we can actually improve. We also have on the back end, what I call the back end, but after we're building and testing and so forth, we have cookbooks to rapidly configure release management and code management services through Azure DevOps, or doing release management through Microsoft's life cycle services, sometimes called LCS. So with those tools, we can not only rapidly mobilize and begin delivering, we can deliver incremental value quicker, which actually leads to better customer satisfaction and a quick time to market.
In your experience, just over recent weeks even, do you have any observations on the steps that enterprises are taking to successfully transition to remote work?
Yeah, no, we've definitely done that. And just, in some disclosure for context, right? I'm currently wrapping up a Microsoft Dynamics D365 finance and operations reimplementation for a global kitchen appliances company. And interestingly enough, and this is before COVID-19, it just turned out that this client was remote throughout the entire world. They have offices in the United States and Australia, New Zealand, Hong Kong, Germany, London, and my team, and I look at globally my team as not only the Avanade consultants, but also IT-specific people with the client. We were working across 10 different time zones. I think the greatest difference between one time zone and the other was 19 hours. So worldwide team, over 50 people. And we had to work remotely. So we're already working in a capacity that COVID-19 really didn't really affect us as a project team. Now, what did we do to really enable that? First of all, really focused in on communication and collaboration and decision making. So making sure that we had a really strong and clear governance process, a change management process, had that well negotiated in advance, and had a lot of great executive support to basically make sure it was actually enforced. When we ran into some challenges, we quickly adapted to, for example, adding in a different type of work item or a database entry into Azure DevOps on the project management side of an impediment. And when people ran into roadblocks, we had this process where anybody could raise an impediment anytime by entering into the database. And at least 3 to 4 times a week, I had a meeting with not only delivery leadership on the Avanade side, but the executives on the client side to review and immediately escalate and address any type of issue that was coming up. So people weren't blocked for more than a day. We also worked really closely using various communication platforms, Microsoft Teams and Zoom. We use Microsoft Teams, obviously, and the client uses Zoom, but now they're actually migrating over to Microsoft Teams themselves. But the ability to actually collaborate through there, get out of the single-threadedness of email, and be able to get people rapidly engage with each other. So if somebody had a problem or they had a question, they could just simply type it into Teams. Somebody would see it in the thread and there be able to immediately respond versus having our inboxes completely filled up. Those are a couple of examples that we've tried, and we can also probe into other areas if you want.
I'd be interested to learn a little more of your impression of Teams thus far. I mean, it's a product that has really had rapid adoption, and it seems like organizations are now trying to see how much they can get out of it, how sort of deeply they can ingrain it into project-based work. Yes, it's good for sort of multi-person sort of chat and threaded communication, but have you seen any uses of it on your projects that are maybe particularly unique or intriguing, or lay out a potential path forward for where it might be going?
Boy, in terms of a path where it's going, I mean, obviously adoption is going through the roof, and it was really interesting for me I was having a call with my nephew, who's 13 years old, a couple of weeks ago, and he was asking me, "Do you use Zooms or Teams?" And I was actually kind of surprised that he knew either. But in terms of school, that's exactly what they're doing at that age. So adoption is actually going through the roof, and it's interesting to see the number of applications and some of the smaller features that are coming into play. So, obviously being able to have a custom background, it's important that we all be able to, in a meeting that we're able to either the speaker can actually be seen so you can get some of the nonverbal communication through and making sure that people aren't necessarily multitasking. In terms of the roadmap, I don't think I can really actually speak to that. I do know that in terms of what we're able to do at Avanade is we're very accustomed to delivery in terms of our training or internal meetings or internal broadcasts, et cetera. We're very accustomed to that, and it's very interesting to see clients now realizing some of the power of what you can do through Teams.
So, as you were saying, I mean, this particular project that you've been working on and pretty invested in had sort of it sounds like the organization had sort of a culture of embracing remote work to some degree. I imagine you still run into companies at various times who they're very committed, or they have been, I guess, until now, to a lot of in-person meetings, a lot of on-site visits. Have you been thinking about how some of those types of clients or those types of projects are going to need to change? Any recommendations perhaps for organizations that really are making a big change right now because really they're forced to?
Yeah. No, I've worked at client sites before where they were insistent that every consultant actually be there every week, or or they were so accustomed to having a dedicated conference room or war room where a whiteboard, and in every meeting somebody immediately went to the whiteboard, or they were writing on the whiteboard, and there was a whiteboard in the hallway. I think the whiteboard's actually going to be one of the key things that are missed as a result of working remotely, even though some of that functionality is in Teams. But when we do start looking at meetings being done virtually, we really do have to, I think, slow down our expectations, right? As a high school football coach, as I was learning how to develop, let's say, maybe a new skill, that coach used to say is, slow is smooth and smooth is fast. And as much as we want to try and rush through a particular meeting, and there are things that we get by being present with other people and getting that nonverbal communication, which they say is almost, 90% of communication in and of itself, we really do need to think a little bit slower and think through what we're going to do. I mean, if you think about in a requirements gathering phase for, let's say, an ERP project, and we call it the Envision Phase. And I've seen multiple projects where we're just lucky to try and get the subject matter experts in a room at the same time because everybody's got this crazy schedule. And we try and do these 6 to 8 hour marathon days of standing in front of a whiteboard or projecting up on a screen and people taking lots of notes and having this really, really active discussion. That's hard to do in an ERP project, especially in remote work. I mean, like I said, most of our business is really people in relationship, building. So what we can do, and what I think is really kind of effective, is flipping it around and saying we're going to spend more time preparing and less time actually presenting and talking. So I think some of the research has shown and some of our observations have verified that really you can only do about a 3-hour session at a time. And that involves probably about, best practices, maybe a 10-minute break every hour or a couple of 10-minute breaks, I guess, in a 3-hour session. And then I always like to pause every 15 to 20 minutes and repeat back to the customer what it is that we either decided, resolved, or discussed. To try and do this remote, I mean, that's where, going back to AIES, that package of tools is really important because our people can actually put something graphical. They don't have to create something graphical. It's already there, like a Visio diagram, and say, okay, this is how D365 works. Let's walk through your business process and make sure it matches. So we're able to rapidly iterate and demo something for a client, which is important. And it helps us get through the process, but we can't really say to ourselves that we're moving exactly at the same pace as if we were standing in front of a client. So, being able to slow down and say, okay, I'm going to do 3 hours of content in front of the client and maybe 5 hours of prep and note taking or documentation on before and after, that's probably a little bit closer to the new way we work.
Yeah, does it, in this new way of working, does it change the way you try to monitor risks or like monitor project risks perhaps?
It does, but I don't think it's really that much different. I mean, to me, a risk is simply, I look at it as an unplanned event. That's my definition of a risk. And so we may have some unplanned events, but realistically, miscommunication is always going to be an unplanned event on any different type of project. So in terms of mitigation, it is probably a little bit of a different approach where, I'm going to want to encourage more follow-up conversations. I've also, with this particular project, we moved away from a traditional or waterfall approach to actually deploying this solution agile. And the real benefit there, whether or not it's true agile or some hybrid version of agile, the concept is I'm going to time box something. I'm going to get somebody to actually show something working or a demo in front of the customer and get some feedback. And I don't care if it's an ERP project, CRM project, custom app dev project, and so forth. If the first time that the client is actually seeing something is in your testing or stabilization phase after build, you're going to probably have problems. So I'm going to say is that, I don't see the risks as being different. I think it's, quite frankly, a little more encouraging to, or a little bit more of a focus to get something working in front of the customer quickly, even if it's just a simple workflow so that they can actually give you some feedback. And that's probably the best way you're going to mitigate that risk.
That's interesting, kind of the way maybe new project methodologies kind of go hand in hand with managing or mitigating risk. And, I have to say, I'm hearing sort of on the one hand, generally speaking, that there's sort of a growing interest in Agile, but on the other side, there's still a lot of people and a lot of organizations, I guess you'd say, who have not really adopted it yet, whether it's for custom app development or for ERP projects in particular. What would you say? Is that still sort of an area where there's a lot of room for growth in terms of, accepting Agile as a mindset?
Definitely. It is definitely a shift in mindset. It's definitely a shift away from, quite frankly, more. I mean, if you really think about it, it's lean manufacturing methodologies applied to the software development process, right? And it certainly is a mindset away from way we've basically done a lot of business in the past. This particular client, though, has a relatively new management team, and so the senior managers that have come in have truly adopted Agile. As a matter of fact, many of them came from Agile software companies. So when they look at the problem, they're trying to not only change the mindset of IT, but they're also trying to change the line of business's mindset of how things are done, and including their own product development organization. So you really do need to have buy-in at the top for Agile, and you need to have somebody who understands it enough that they can help you change the behavior of the organization, and that leads to some level of success. Now, unfortunately, like a lot of things, there's a lot of people who've read, maybe a white paper on Agile, and they know it's the buzzword, but they haven't really taken the time to experience what it's like to be on an Agile development team or seen the process actually work as either like a product owner or a Scrum master or a member of the development team, and that becomes that in itself is a risk of actually being successful in terms of Agile.
Sure. Thinking more broadly, I mean, when it comes to ERP right now in the Microsoft space, there's a lot of attention being paid, understandably so, to either upgrades or reimplementations to get onto Dynamics 365, finance and supply chain management. Anything else you would add from your own observations about sort of the overall sentiment out there among companies that are looking at an F&O project in the near future?
Well, sure. There is certainly a drive to move to D365, partially because Microsoft has announced that they're going to end mainstream support for certain versions. I think, AX 2012 and AX 29. I think that support's going to end sometime in the October 2021 timeframe. So that is definitely a motivator for people to get off the product. The other thing, too, though, quite frankly, is lowering their total cost of ownership. Putting aside just for a moment, or putting aside the conversation about the economics of being on Azure versus maintaining your in-house servers, the fact that Microsoft is driving so much innovation into the core platform itself, and that these processes have been more or less streamlined, having customized processes isn't necessarily a value add or a differentiator to many businesses. And so if you can move closer towards what Microsoft is providing as a core platform, you no longer have to maintain a bunch of customizations that are costing you money. For example, one client had over 800 customized reports, and that client said during their reimplementation, I'm not going to migrate any of these reports to the new platform until somebody actually complains. And 6 months later, out of 800 reports, only one resulted in, we need to actually go do that. That's a lot of cost savings in and of itself.
Yeah, that's an incredible story. One, I thought you were maybe going to say a few dozen, but that's really something.
No, everything else could have been taken. Everything else was satisfied with the core platform of D365.
Very interesting. Yeah, I would love to maybe pick your brain on more as I guess you'd say the overall rollout of F&O sort of continues through the next couple of years here, as especially with AX customers, but I'm sure other companies sort of coming on board with this product. It'd be great to check back in with you and sort of see how these projects are changing, evolving, because they are so different from probably the ERP projects that most of these organizations have done in the past. I think we will wrap it up there. David Misakian, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the podcast today.
Thank you.
This has been another episode of the MSDW podcast. Thanks so much for listening, and thank you to David Misakian of Avanade for joining me today. Download Avanade's latest white paper to learn how to increase efficiency by upgrading from AX to Dynamics 365. You'll learn why a modern cloud-based ERP solution is essential to the future-ready company, why to upgrade, and how to do it right. Visit www.avanade.com/axupgrade.